I honestly don't know what's more cruel, making gamers kill dogs inside of The Last of Us Part 2, or teasing gamers with a dog in this episode of the show, only to not have it happen. First Shimmer, now this just feels like torture. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel, and today we are reviewing Season 2 Episode 5 of The Last of Us, and I want to preface this video by saying that I'm a massive fan of The Last of Us Part 2 game. It's my favorite game of all time, and because of that, I'll be splitting this video up into two different sections. The majority of this video will be spoilers for this episode for any non-gamers with comparisons to the game up until this point in time, and the last section will be talking about the implications this episode has on the rest of the story with some game spoilers moving forward. I'll leave timecodes down below if you want to jump around, but without further ado, let's just get into this episode. And if you end up enjoying this review, make sure to subscribe to see more videos just like this one. I'll have weekly reviews out for The Last of Us along with movie reviews as well here on the channel. Now on to this show. This episode is titled Feel Her Love, and it follows the continued revenge tour for Ellie and Dina as they track down Nora, who is one of the members of the Seattle crew who killed Joel. And among the many smaller changes between the game and the show, there's one in this episode that is honestly really bothering me, and I'm very curious to hear how non-gamers feel about this moment. So let's actually jump to the end of this episode during the confrontation between Ellie and Nora, which has a fairly similar setup to what was inside of the game, only there's a lot less wolves and dogs that you kill because Neil Druckmann is a cruel man and had a dog killing mechanic instead of the game. That was just very unforgiving. The confrontation begins very similar in a sense that Nora doesn't do what you expect her to do. She doesn't beg for her life. She doesn't try to convince Ellie not to shoot her. She straight up says that Joel deserved what he got and runs away to try to get her fellow wolves to stop Ellie. The chase is just as intense as you're moving through the hallways of this hospital. However, it differs once you get to the elevator. Inside of the game, Nora comes to an impasse. Ellie is hot on her tail, but in front of her is the spore-infected area, which she's not willing to go into. She decides to stall and to see if the wolves will stop her in time. Ellie then makes a decision to tackle Nora into the spore-infected area, knowing that she could not be infected while also knowing that it will condemn Nora to death. Inside of this episode, we see Nora come to the elevator and decide to try to cross it when the elevator snaps, and then she falls into the basement level on accident. And honestly, I think the change in this moment of this episode that is bothering me is all because of a butterfly effect from the very first season. This episode has to introduce the idea of spores from the very beginning because spores were not an element of infection inside of that first season, unlike the game. The episode starts off with the wolves discovering the spore-infected area inside of the basement of the hospital. This character is confronted with a similar dilemma that Joel had to face, which was to choose somebody that she loves and her son over the safety of the community as a whole. This character makes the opposite decision as Joel, as she decides to sacrifice her son to seal off the basement, although in this case Leon's autonomy is not taken away from him and has a part in making that decision for his mom, unlike Ellie with Joel. But I'll get more into that dilemma in the spoiler section. For me, at least, this moment was a turning point for my perception of Ellie as a character. At this point in the story, Ellie was so blinded for her need for revenge that she started to become fairly unlikable, honestly. When she found out about Dina's pregnancy, she treated it as if it was a threat to her mission rather than seeing it as a potential future with Dina like we had here in the show. Then immediately after that, she goes off on her own to confront Nora, and she pulls out this maneuver and slowly torches information out of that character. And honestly, I think that the show is a bit too afraid to make Ellie as unlikable as she was at this point in the story instead of the game. The showrunners want us to honestly be on her side at this point, and I don't think that was the case inside of the game. But it's not just a matter of likability. Because spores were not introduced sooner, Ellie wouldn't have had the information that she had in the game to make that decision. However, I think that they still could have done it here inside of this episode. Maybe Nora could have stopped at the elevator and tried to explain to her that there's nowhere to go, she is trapped, the infection is in the air and inside of the basement, and if they do continue, they will both die. And if she were to kill Nora in this moment, it wouldn't matter because the wolves will be right behind them. But like I said, the intention of this moment inside of the game seemed to be, at least for me, to make Ellie unlikable, and that doesn't seem to be what the show wants to do at this point in time. Or maybe it still is supposed to feel like a turning point for this character. One of the reveals we get inside of this episode is the fact that Ellie does know what Joel did to make the Seattle crew go after him. She knows that Joel killed the people that could have made a cure. She knows that Joel sacrificed humanity as a whole for her, and yet she still doesn't care. This doesn't stop her at all, and that revelation is followed directly by Ellie torturing this woman in a way that might just be as cruel as what Abby did to Joel. So my question for any non-gamers is, did this moment and these reveals still have that same impact that make you question whether or not Ellie should continue to go on this crusade, because for me in this moment, inside of the game, it was a clear turning point to make me feel like Ellie was going down the wrong path.
Where is she? Where is she?
But of course, that wasn't the only thing to happen inside of this episode. We got to see Ellie and Dina maneuver between the three warring factions inside of Seattle: the Wolves, the Scars, and the Infected. In their attempts to maneuver around the Wolves, Dina comes up with a plan to go through a warehouse that was being ignored by the Wolves for some reason. Once they get inside, they realize it is littered with Stalkers, which forces our characters to fight like Ellie rather than Dina. Dina has been here to keep Ellie grounded in making smarter decisions rather than being more rash and reckless, but once they get into a situation that they cannot get out of, that quickly gets thrown out the window. Just before they will both surely die from the Infected, Jesse comes in to save the day, which is no surprise for gamers or non-gamers really. Their bad luck does, however, continue as the gunshots get the attention of the Wolves, which lead our characters to run into the forest to get away from the Wolves, only to run directly into the Scars. We get to see how these Scars operate and how cruel they are in hanging a wolf and spilling his guts all over onto the ground, which is directly from the game. Love to see that. Dina does get shot with an arrow in this moment, leading Ellie to cause a distraction so Jesse and Dina can escape back to the theater. And now that Ellie is on her own in this moment, she sees the hospital is finally in reach, and she decides to go there rather than going back to the hospital with the rest of the group. We get to see the more rash decision making take front and center in this moment, which I hope we'll get to see a lot more of, because Dina's constant presence being around Ellie has kind of held her back from being the version of the character that I know from the game, who is reckless and dangerous. Jesse and Tommy came after Ellie and Dina to bring them home rather than helping them with their quest for revenge, and now that Dina is hurt and pregnant, I hope that it causes a massive argument between the three of them in wanting to continue or to go home, and the decision that Ellie makes in this moment to continue on with her quest for revenge will hopefully give a reason for these characters to have a different perspective of Ellie as a character along with us, the audience. And of course, at the very end of this episode, we get to see us jump back in time, and for the first time in 3 episodes, we get to see Pedro Pascal again in a very sitcom-y way.
Hey, kiddo.
Hi.
So at this point, I want to get into spoilers for the game moving forward. So if you haven't played the game, like I said, comment down below what you think of the hospital sequence with Nora. Did it make you question Ellie's motivations, or are you still fully on board with her quest for revenge? So to any non-gamers, thanks for watching, and to any gamers, let's get into the spoiler section of this video. I think it's really interesting to see how they are structuring this show with the Joel flashbacks. Inside of the game, after each day in Seattle, we get to see some sequence with Joel and Ellie inside of the past. This made it so it didn't go too long without seeing Joel inside of this story, because he's still very much a large part of these characters, and it'd be weird to not see him all that much. So it's been fascinating watching this story play out without seeing Joel constantly throughout the show and leaving a large gap in the story without seeing him, because I do think that it does add to his presence feeling like it's gone, feeling like he has been missing from this story, feeling our characters mourn the loss of this character. And setting these flashbacks at either the beginning of the story, before Joel is killed, along with putting a full episode of flashbacks at this point in the story, is also interesting in terms of that structure. It seems like we're getting the museum sequence inside of this next episode, which would be a nice change of pace to see our characters happy for once, although I don't think that'll last very long, because I think we'll also get to see how Ellie found out about what Joel did, because it is very much teased inside of this episode. And like I've also theorized in the past couple videos here on the channel, I think that Eugene is going to have a large part in Ellie discovering the truth. It seems like we'll get to see the entire arc of Ellie and Joel having a happy relationship in accepting the lie, up until the moment where Ellie and Joel have a falling out because of Ellie discovering what that lie was. But the question is, will we see their reconciliation, which we skipped over inside of that first episode? I think it's possible that we do see that, because that scene was, talked about inside of the Last of Us podcast with Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin, but I still think that I'd rather see that moment happen at the very end of this story once we get to the end of season 3. I also could be wrong, but I feel like at this point in the story, Ellie found out that Abby had kind of gone missing in the eyes of the Wolves. I feel like in the game, Nora mentions something about her going off on her own, which teases Abby's arc and leaving the Wolves doctrine inside of her half of the story, but maybe we just heard that over radio calls through other characters, because I do remember the game having a similar cut to black during her torture scene. Ellie does find out about the aquarium through Nora though, so if we do get the flashback episode next week, then we probably won't see anything else current day until the finale, which I'm assuming will be Ellie splitting off with Jesse and Dina to go on her own, which she will then kill Mel and Owen inside of that aquarium. But that also leaves very little time for that to happen, along with all these stuff that needs to happen inside of the theater. Tommy will probably meet up with Ellie inside of the aquarium, which will lead them to go back to the theater, where Abby then confronts all of them, killing Jesse and possibly leaving off on a cliffhanger at that point in the story. I was theorizing before that I thought we would end off seeing the entire fight between Ellie and Abby in this sequence, unlike the game, which still might be the case, but it seems like having an entire episode dedicated to Joel and Ellie's backstory is going to take away from that a little bit. The Last of Us Part 2 was a very, very long game. We spent so much time in Seattle, so much time tracking down these different people that had to do with Joel's death, but here it seems like we're getting a very condensed version of that. So I'm not sure that having only one episode in Seattle left inside of this season is enough to really capture Ellie's rage that we got inside of the game, especially since those changes were made with the Nora sequence. When it comes to building up Ellie's rage, I think that it's possible that this next episode could also add to that, even though it is not taking place in current time. If we get to see the entire sequence where, Joel and Ellie have their falling out, where Ellie finds out the truth, and if Eugene is a part of that and he finds out that Ellie is immune, and in order to keep that secret, Joel decides to kill, this Eugene character for Ellie, once again taking away her autonomy in, making these decisions, maybe that, void between these characters and that decision making and that, rift between them can add to Ellie's rage, because we get to have all these different added elements to see how similar Ellie is to Joel, and through seeing Joel's rage, we get to see how that is similar to Ellie's rage inside of that finale. So maybe there are ways that we can tie this all together, but for now, I would just have to wait and see how they pull off this aspect of the character. But those are just going to be my thoughts on this episode of The Last of Us. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you have played the game and you want to talk spoilers, just make sure to tag your comments with a spoiler warning before you get into it, because I very much want to hear your thoughts on these changes, along with whether or not do you think they're able to pull off the story by the end of it. And of course, if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I'll have a review out for probably either Friendship or Final Destination this week, along with weekly reviews out for the show until its finale in a couple weeks here. I do think that my next video on Last of Us is going to be a little bit shorter because I will be out of town, but I will try to still talk about it here on the channel for you guys. So thanks everyone for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next one.